Very good evening. Welcome to State of Business on Our Television. I'm Ashingsani Veerasinghe. Let's have a look at the headlines first. Supermarkets and pharmacies at curfew-imposed areas to be closed during the weekend. Employers lament over the proposed increase of daily wages of plantation sector. News in detail. Police spokesman DIG Ajit Rohana states that all supermarkets and pharmacies in the curfew-imposed areas, which were opened from 8 a.m. today, will be closed during this weekend. In the meantime, the extraordinary gazette on COVID-19 regulations issued last night stresses that courts can now punish the quarantine regulations offenders with a fine of up to 10,000 rupees and or 6 months imprisonment. Supermarkets and pharmacies located in the curfew-imposed areas were open today from 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. But police spokesman DIG Ajit Rohana states that shops and pharmacies will not be allowed to remain open tomorrow and the day after tomorrow in areas where curfew is in place. DIG Ajit Rohana said in a statement to the media that the curfew is still in effect in 19 police divisions. He further said that 25 persons have been arrested for violating the curfew in the last 24 hours and 167 persons have been arrested for violating the curfew so far. In the meantime, Health Minister Pavitra Wanyarachi yesterday signed a gazette that laid down COVID-19 safety guidelines, and it was published last night itself. Thereby, courts can now punish offenders with a fine of up to 10,000 rupees and or 6 months imprisonment. The Gazette makes it a legal requirement to wear face mask and maintain social distancing in places where the public gathers. It was further noted that all persons who enter a place of business or employment will be required to wear a face mask and 1 meter distance must be maintained among people. All persons entering a place of employment must have their temperature monitored and have their personal information entered into a log. Moreover, the Minuangoda COVID-19 cluster has soared with 61 more positive cases reported today afternoon. Thereby, the total number of COVID-19 cases reported from the Minuangoda cluster has soared to 1,850. Thus, as of 3 p.m. today, the total COVID-19 detected cases in the country are 5,305 and 3,385 have been discharged after a full recovery. Furthermore, Ambassador of the Republic of Korea, Woon Jin-jeon, met with Acting Inspector General of Police C.D. Vikramaratne and a delegation of the Sri Lanka Police yesterday at the Korean Embassy in Colombo and has donated a consignment of reusable fabric masks manufactured by a Sri Lankan social enterprise for distribution among police personnel in appreciation of their dedication and commitment to control COVID-19 island-wide. The Institute of Policy Studies, which is an independent academic research organization, stresses that government spending to mitigate the COVID-19 pandemic, accounting to 0.25% of GDP, is not satisfactory given that of the other lower middle-income countries. Hosting a virtual panel discussion yesterday in conjunction with the release of IPS's annual flagship report, Sri Lanka State of the Economy 2020, Executive Director of the Institute of Policy Studies of Sri Lanka, Dr. Dushni Veerakone, highlights that comprehensive fiscal policy that can place public finances in order should be the focus of the forthcoming budget.
But even if you control spending, it's not going to make a huge difference to the kind of fiscal rebalancing that we need to put in place. And that brings us back to revenues, because we need to raise spending on education, on health, on social protection. So even if you control spending, the additional spending needs are mounting at the same time. So on the revenue side, I think, yes, we do have to revisit tax policies at some point, but it cannot be premature, because if once we get into a recovery phase and you suddenly go into a fiscal consolidation process of raising taxes, that's not going to be very helpful. So the phasing in of tax and spending policy reforms over the next 3 years, I think is going to be very critical. It has to be done in a very systematic and methodical way. There's very little room to improvise as we go along. So I assume or hope that the budget that we will see being presented in November is the first step in putting forward that 3-year policy program to bring us to some sort of degree of fiscal stability in the medium term.
Chief Executive Officer of Dilma Silonti, Dilhan Fernando stresses that even though increasing the minimum daily wage of estate workers is commendable, the estate owners are unable to do so at the moment given the extreme hostile international environment erupted due to COVID-19 situation.
The core issue we have that is also a part of the definition of a living wage is the fact that we existing within an extremely oppressive international environment in terms of cost of production. Labor cost accounts for nearly over 60%. And beyond that, because we operate in a fairly hostile, not fairly, I mean a very hostile international environment, if you look at some of our customers, some of our retail customers, which are a very necessary part of our business, they would make 40-45% margin. And if our product fails to achieve that, we're out. And so in that situation, us and all Sri Lankan tea producers are in a very difficult situation. If you look at the cost of production, the net sale average, there is a very thin margin between the cost of production and the export average. So that essentially means that we are forced to export much of the benefit of the tea that we produce. If that can be corrected, and it can only be corrected through value addition, which is a function of marketing, etc., then we have a situation where absolutely we should and could afford much better facilities and wages. But at the moment, Sri Lanka pays significantly higher wages than most producing centers.
Stay tuned for more news after this short break. Welcome back after the break. Minister of Education Professor G.L. Pires emphasizes on the urgent need for reforms to bridge the gap between education and employment opportunities and the need for introducing methods of teaching and learning that develop analytical and critical faculties of learners. Professor G.L. Pires made these observations addressing the inaugural session of the International Research Conference of General Sir John Kotalawala Defence University, held under the theme of Holistic Approach to National Growth and Security.
We are talking to the major chambers of commerce, the providers of jobs in the private sector, to ascertain from them the employment opportunities that will be available in their institutions during the next 3 or 4 years. What are the skills which they are looking for? Because they are telling me, it's not that we don't have jobs to offer, we have jobs. But when we interview people, we find that they don't have the skills which we want in our institutions. So we do not want to enhance a reservoir of angry and frustrated young people. We want to ensure that there is correlation between the education that is imparted in our institutions and the skills for which there is an identifiable demand in the marketplace. So these are some of the adventures that we have embarked upon. We are also looking critically at our curricula, which are obsolete and anachronistic. They have not been revisited for a very long period. They must be in line with the needs of our society. Methods of teaching. There is far too much emphasis on rote learning, on memory. The students are required to commit their notes to memory, retain that in their memory, and reproduce it at examination. That is the antithesis of education. Education comes from the Latin word educare, which means to draw out, not to force in a vast volume of factual material into the mind of the student. So the purpose of education is to develop the analytical and the critical faculty of the student, to encourage him or her to think for himself or herself, and to apply that volume of knowledge to face the challenges of life.
Secretary to the Ministry of Internal Trade, Food Security and Consumer Welfare, Bhadrani Jayawardena, states that the price escalations of the essential commodities in this season is a common phenomenon, but the government has always taken measures to facilitate the farmers as well as the consumers. Minister Secretary made these remarks yesterday addressing a media briefing held at the Trade Ministry premises.
විශේෂයෙන්ම සෑම වර්ෂයකම ඔක්තෝබර් නොවැම්බර් දෙසැම්බර් සහ ජනවාරි මාසවල වෙළඳපොලේ අත්‍යවශ්‍ය භාණ්ඩවල මිල වැඩිවීමක් වෙනවා. එකක් මාස් කන්නේ වගාව පටන් ගන්නේ ජනවාරි නිසා.
Price escalations of the essential commodities in the months of October, November, December and January is a common fact. The reason for that is that the harvesting from the Maha season begins only in end of January and the beginning of February. Government does the price variations of canned fish, sugar, big onions and dal regularly. We do it to facilitate the consumers or the general public. Sometimes we increase the taxes to facilitate the local farmer and we reduce the taxes to facilitate the consumers. That decision is taken by the government considering the market behavior. That is not done with pre-announcements. Government has already informed all Satus outlets in the country to sell canned fish, sugar, big onions and dal at reduced prices. Whenever the farming community faces any issue, the government intervenes. Investment institution First Capital Holdings states that the trading in stock market was heavily predominated by the retail sector throughout the past week.
We saw a continuous market uptrend this week, except on Tuesday where there was a bit of a downturn. Buying interest in the market was extremely high, where retail participation has been driving the market this week. We saw significantly high level of turnover on all days. Turnover has been exceeding 3 billion rupees, and a couple of days we saw even turnover exceeding 5 billion rupees with over 40,000 trades also in those few days. So with that, what we are actually seeing is the retail community is starting to dominate the overall market activity, and with that basically the shares that were very popular were the mid-cap shares to penny stock shares. So we saw a significant amount of those kind of shares moving in value. However, towards the mid to end of this week, we are starting to see a shift in this trend. That is, we are starting to see slowly where investors are getting into more and more blue chip counters. So we are seeing a bit of selling pressure coming in the penny stocks or the smaller stock market cap stocks in the market.
Bringing the forecast for the coming week, First Capital Holdings highlights that the positive momentum of the week will be continued with the heavy local participation, even though that of the foreign sector is low.
Looking at the upcoming week, we feel that the positive trend in the market is likely to continue going forward as well, with the low interest rate environment prevailing in the market. And also with the news of a possible rate cut also in the market, there is likely to be continued investor interest in the equity market with extremely low level of FD rates or all other fixed income rates being significantly lower. So with that, we are expecting continued retail participation at a very high level, while foreigners, if you take, or throughout this year we've seen net foreign selling. We don't think that that trend is likely to change anytime soon. So with that, we feel the foreign selling of course is likely to continue. However, all that selling with the highly local dominated investor segment is likely to get completely absorbed the selling pressure, and with that we feel that with the high positive sentiment that is there in the market, the uptrend in the market is also likely to continue for a few more weeks.
We'll be back with stock updates after this short break. Welcome back after the break. The trading at Colombo Stock Exchange ended on a positive note today. The all-share price index gained 25.79 points to close at 5,945.79, and the S&P SL 20 gained 4.29 points to close at 2,370.43. The turnover was 3.6 billion rupees. Up next are forex rates. And that's all the news for today. See you on Sunday with Biz Roundup at 7 p.m. Until then, take care. Good night.